this pie crust is going to take 1 1/3 cups of flour and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to measure that out. Bless you. Now, we want to make sure that we don't pack down our flour when we're making pie crust, because that's going to affect how much liquid we need to put into the pie. So, again, remember, you don't pack down flour. I need 1 1/3 cups of flour. And who remembers what the chef from Johnson & Wales said about salt the other day? What should you do when you're adding salt into a recipe? Who remembers? Yes? Yes, she said to stir it in because we want it to be evenly distributed, and we don't want it to, get a mouthful of salt in one section of whatever we're eating. So we're going to stir this in. Now, who remembers what the biscuit method is? Who remembers? We put our dry ingredients in the bowl, then what do we do next? Cut in the fat. So today what I'm going to use is I'm going to use shortening, okay, shortening. And you can use a number of different fats to make pie crust. You could use butter instead, you could use margarine instead, you could use oil. But oil is going to make a mealy kind of crust. It's not going to be flaky. And I like the flaky kind of crust. So I'm going to use shortening. It's calling for 1/2 cup of shortening. And that's what you'll be using in your pie crust tomorrow. So you're going to need a rubber scraper when you do this, because this is one of those ingredients that you have to pack down and into the cup. Otherwise you won't get the amount that you need. So I'm going to use my rubber scraper, and then you're going to need your rubber scraper to take it out of the cup once you get it packed in there. And again, this is another reason why you need hot soapy water when you're washing the dishes, because you're going to have this cup with all this shortening, and cold water is not going to take it away. So you need to have hot soapy water. Okay, you want to get all that in there. And then I'm going to use what to cut this in with. What tool am I going to use?
Pastry blender.
Okay, so I'm using my pastry blender. And what I'm doing now is I'm coating those particles of flour with fat so that when it cooks, it's going to separate the layers, and I'm going to get the flakiness that I want. So I'm going to cut this in here until it looks like a coarse kind of meal here. Cornmeal, coarse. I don't want it to be really, really fine, because I don't want my fat to get broken down so much that it melts and becomes liquid. So it's going to look kind of mealy, lumpy-like. Now, it's always best to work with really, really cold water when you're working with pie crust. I have put some ice in this water here, again, because we don't want the fat to melt on us. And the recipe is calling for 3 to 4 tablespoons. It's never really going to tell you the exact amount, because the humidity is going to affect how much you put in here too. But I'm going to measure off 1/4 cup because I don't want to go past that amount. I'm making a dough. What is a dough? You can manipulate it with your hands, right? So I can't have it really sticky. Otherwise, it's not going to work for me. Now, when we did the biscuit method, and I'm using the biscuit method today, all right? But when we made the biscuits, we added the liquid all at once. The difference here is we sprinkle in a tablespoon at a time. And then we're going to kind of mix in between when we do that. I'm going to actually put 2 in. I'm just going to sprinkle it around. And I'm going to use my fork to stir this up. So I'm using a fork to kind of help mix this around. And again, we don't want to go past the 1/4 cup. I want to use just enough water to pull this together. So I'm stirring this around. Can everybody see what I'm doing? Okay. I need just a little bit more, and then I'm going there with my hands. And I'm going to pull this together. Now I've used about, it seems that I've used more than the number of tablespoons it called for, but I haven't really because I poured in 1/4 cup. And how many tablespoons is 1/4 cup? How many tablespoons, Allie, in 1/4 cup? How many tablespoons in a cup? 16. So, how many in 1/4 cup? 4. So I poured out my 1/4 cup, and I haven't actually used it all. So this is what I want. I want a dough that looks something like this. And it's not sticking to my hands. All right. Now I need to move stuff out of my way so I have room. If I was going to do this at home, because I've made a lot of pies, I would do this on my counter. All right. And what would I put on my counter so it wouldn't stick? Flour. Flour, right. But how many of you made pie crust at home by yourselves? How many of you? That one. Maggie, can you get me one of those wax paper containers, please? Thank you. I'm going to make it a way that it should not fail for you. All right? Again, I've made a lot, and I don't do this at home anymore. I've passed this stage, but so this works for you. Tyler, put your phone in your pocket. Okay? I don't know if you're watching a movie or you're talking to people. I don't need to watch it here. Okay, so I'm going to have you take a piece of wax paper, and I'm going to just take a little bit of my water with my fingers, and I'm going to just like put a few beads of that on my counter. That's going to hold my wax paper in place. Don't put a lot, because then it's going to disintegrate the wax paper and it's going to go into your dough. So you just want a little bit, and then I'm going to take some flour, and instead of putting it on my counter, I'm going to put it on my wax paper, kind of spread it around. I'm going to keep my dough in a circular form. I'm going to put some flour on top of it, and I'm just going to kind of keep it, flatten it down sort of into a pancake. Now I'm going to take another piece of wax paper. This is the way you're going to do it tomorrow. Okay? Then I'm going to take my rolling pin, and I'm going to start rolling this out. Now when you roll out dough, you always want to roll from the center out. Try to keep it in a circle. So when it starts getting big in one area, go to another area to try to compensate. And always from the center out. And sometimes I like to flip this over because the wax paper on the bottom sometimes gets crinkled. And I like it to stay flat and smooth. Make sure you give yourself lots of room. Now how am I going to know when this is ready to go into my pie pan? What can I do? Who knows? Put it in the pie pan? Well, actually, I'm going to use my pie pan as a gauge. So I'm going to take my pie plate and I'm going to turn it upside down. And in order for this to fit the pie plate, it has to be at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches past the edge of the pie plate. It's not there yet, so I'm going to continue to roll, always from the center out. Because if I roll from my edges are going to get so thin that they're going to start to fall apart on me when I try to move this. So always from the center out. Okay, how's it looking now? What do you think? It's almost there. I'm going to just, up here it needs a little, and if I need to, I can always piece it too. Like if one edge gets really farther out than the other, I can sort of cut a little section of that off, and with a little bit of water I can piece it. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel off that top layer very carefully. And this is where consistency is really important. If your dough is too sticky, you're going to have trouble peeling that off. So it has to be the right consistency. So don't overdo your water. At this point, I'm going to take my pie plate and my hand. I'm just going to flip it like this. And I'm going to use my fingers to push it into the pie plate. I don't want to stretch the dough, because when it cooks it will shrink and it won't cover the entire pie plate. So I have to have it at least that inch to inch and a half to the outer edge of the pie plate when I'm measuring. Now I'm going to very carefully peel this top layer of wax paper off. Okay. So I've got it in my pan, I've pushed it down the edges, and now I'm just going to take a little bit of water on my fingers. I'm going to go around the edge. Now when you make, all of you are going to make apple pie tomorrow. So one side of the kitchen is going to make one crust, and one side of the kitchen is going to make another crust, and you're going to put the two together. One of them is going to be the bottom crust, then you're all going to be making some apples. They're going to go in the center. Then the other side is going to bring their crust over, and you're going to put it in on the top. When you do that, your pie crust is going to be folded on top of one another and into the pan. But because I'm making lemon meringue pie, I just need to do one crust, and I'm going to turn my edge of my dough into my pan. Now the edges of your dough should just touch, no more than touch the counter. If it's more than that, you're going to have to cut some off, right? And then I'm going to do what they call either crimping or fluting the edge, and there's a number of different ways you can do that. You could just take a fork, which a lot of times I see when I go down to Pennsylvania, the Amish. When they make pies, they'll go around and they'll take the fork and they'll just push down on it like that and do an edging with a fork all the way around. Or you can take the traditional way, your two fingers, and kind of just push the edge together like this and make a fluted edge like that. When I make my pie crust, I like to just kind of squeeze the edge, and it makes sort of a wavy look around the pie. And you probably, at Thanksgiving, could tell, like if somebody makes pies, whose pies are whose, just by the way that the edge of the crust is handled. All right, so I'm just kind of going around and doing that all the way so it's consistent. I'm going to go back to where I did it differently and just make it all the same. Okay, now because this crust has to be cooked ahead of time, because I'm going to put a filling in it and it's not going to be cooked again because the filling is going to be cooked when I put it in. I have to bake this ahead of time. I have to bake this pie shell ahead of time. And I have to prick it. Why do we think I have to prick the bottom of this pan? Why do you think I'm doing this? When it starts to cook steam, because there's water in the crust and air is going to kind of catch underneath it, and if I didn't have a place for that to escape, I would get these big bubbles in my crust, and it would come up like this, and then I'd go to put my filling in, and it wouldn't go in because I wouldn't have enough room for it. So I have to have places for that steam and air to escape when it starts to cook. It's going in the oven. It's already been preheated for 400 degrees for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to put my timer on for 10 minutes. Clean up just a little bit so I can get up. And you should too, like in between, you should always be cleaning as you go so that you can get out of here on time.